the Rambler Network.
Step right up, ladies and gents, a show for the ages, a spectacle of silent silver. Gather around, folks, don't be shy. A real humdinger of a picture awaits. Thrills, chills, and plenty of laughs. From the golden days of flickering reels and grand Nickelodeons comes a program most extraordinary. A real corker of a show, a top-notch talkie about a world with no talk at all. It's Casablanca Silent Treatment. When people say silent films are boring, I like to remind them that in 1902, a year before the Wright brothers' first flight, Georges Méliès shot a rocket into the eye of the moon. A trip to the moon is often considered the very first science fiction film. Up until this point, most films were what were called actualities, a term popularized by the Lumiere brothers. They were basically short glimpses of everyday life. A train arriving, workers leaving a factory, busy street, stuff like that. Méliès wasn't interested in recording reality. He wanted to invent it. By 1902, cinema was no longer a novelty. It was becoming a genuine artistic medium. And A Trip to the Moon was one of the earliest examples of film telling a full structured story. It uses special effects and painted backgrounds to tell the story, as well as built sets and props. Méliès was famous for manufacturing spectacle and imagination. The film is actually best known for the shot of the rocket hitting the moon's eye. And that's usually the only thing people know about the film. And they think that's the whole thing. It's actually 16 minutes long. The first, I want to say about 5 minutes, takes place before that happens. Like the first 2 or 3 minutes is a single shot. There's no intertitles, but you still know what's going on. There's a professor. He basically draws on the chalkboard like what the plan, basically the plot of the movie is. Like, there's Earth, there's the moon, here's a rocket, dot 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 dot. We're going to the moon. And he's got a room full of, I would say, students, astronauts, something. So a lot of this movie is more context based. When the film came out, they didn't need intertitles because they had a narrator with, they were basically narrating the film. We don't have that now, obviously. Instead, we have to use the context given in the film. And then in the next scene, it's them loading the rocket. And I think probably the second most famous shot of the film is of the how they shoot the rocket. Again, this was a year before the Wright brothers flew, so space travel wasn't even conceived yet. Like, there was no people thought that this was a very outlandish concept. And so now you know, in order to get to space, we have the rocket. It's standing, and then it goes in the air. What they basically used what they knew at the time, and they used a cannon. They shot the rocket off to the moon using a cannon, and it's probably the longest cannon ever. I mean, granted, it was a painting, but it still looks really cool. The version I watched, I had seen the original black and white one, but on Max, as in HBO Max, there's a colorized version, because Méliès did a black and white and a color version, and the beginning of the version on Max opens with a title card explaining that the film was considered lost for a long time until it was discovered in 1999, and then in the early 2010s, it was digitally restored, and that's the version that's on Max. And so again, I'd seen the movie in black and white, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's interesting. It's even better in color. It's because the way it was colorized, it doesn't look like a modern film. It looks more surreal. It does kind of have like a CG feel to it. It was the frames were hand painted, and that's how the film was done back then. That's how color film was done in the early days. They were hand painted frame by frame. And I think the title cards say there was like 13,000 frames, so that's a lot of frames to hand paint. And then when they get to the moon, there's these creatures chasing them around, and what I love, and I think it's kind of hilarious, is that they're defeated by umbrellas. So you take the umbrella, you hit them with it, and they disappear in a puff of smoke. And then the protagonist, by the way, the professor who goes to the moon, he's at the beginning, and then he like goes to the moon, played by Georges Méliès himself. So that was a little fun fact. So the professor and the astronauts that go to the moon, they get chased around by the Earth inhabitants, and again, this was long before we ever went to space, so nobody knew about if you wanted to nitpick this film about scientific accuracy, like this whole thing would just be like red X's. Like everything about this is completely scientifically inaccurate. For starters, the moon has plant life. It has life. They're breathing on the moon. There's gravity. The Earth is a little closer than it should be. I kind of want to see somebody like take it way too seriously. Like, this film is very inaccurate. Now, here's my list of reasons it's inaccurate. In fact, I think the only thing accurate about this film is that when they get back to Earth, they have to land in water. I think it's funny how they get back to Earth, because when watching it, I'm thinking, how are they going to get back? They used a cannon to get to the moon. How are they getting back to Earth? Well, you want to know how they do it? The rocket is on a cliff, and then it falls off, and it falls back to Earth. Which, I mean, 1902 logic, the moon is up in the sky, and the gravity, it falls down. They don't know about the zero gravity in space. They just know Earth. They just know the moon is up, and what comes up comes down. So, I mean, it is easy to kind of laugh and make fun of that, but that's what they knew at the time. Versions of this film is available on YouTube. However, I do recommend watching the version on Max, because it's the colorized version. It's not like a modern colorized version where they're like, oh, we're gonna go back and colorize this because it's fun. It was an officially done colorized version by Méliès and his team. It was just lost and then found and digitally restored. And that's the version on Max, and I do recommend checking that out. There was technically a prequel to A Trip to the Moon. Or rather, A Trip to the Moon is a sequel, technically. Very technically. I don't know if there's anything official. In 1898, Méliès did a film called The Astronomer's Dream. It was a short film. It's literally like 3 minutes long. It's very experimental, kind of surreal. Not as surreal as Trip to the Moon, but it was hilarious. Like, I was watching it and I was laughing the whole time. And I know I spoiled A Trip to the Moon, but without spoiling The Astronomer's Dream, I will say this astronomer was having a really bad day. Though, to be fair, it is called The Astronomer's Dream, so while it doesn't show him going to sleep or waking up, I'm going to assume it's all a dream. However, the astronomer in The Astronomer's Dream looks and acts suspiciously similar to the one in The Professor and A Trip to the Moon. I believe it was also played by Méliès. And so, even though it's unofficially, even though it's not technically official, I like to imagine that it's a prequel to that. Is that A Trip to the Moon is a sequel to The Astronomer's Dream. That also is on YouTube. Also, last thing I'll say here, this is by far the oldest movie I have ever covered on Casablanca. 1902. Technically, if you want to get extremely technical, the oldest movie I've ever talked about on Casablanca was The Astronomer's Dream, because it's 1898. But I'm not doing a whole episode on that. It's like 3 minutes long. Granted, this one's 16 minutes long, but there is a complete narrative there. Basically, this was one of the first films that had like it's not feature length in what we think of today as feature length, but it does have like a full narrative arc. And up until then, all the films were either actualities, which would just show like busy crowds, trains entering the station, stuff like that. Or like The Astronomer's Dream, and it would just be more of an experimental short film, just kind of playing around with what was possible. This was the first time that there was like a full, complete narrative arc in film. And so that's why this is the furthest back I will go on this show. Because everything before this doesn't technically count. I was going to do an episode on a trip down Market Street. But again, that one's really short. It's considered a silent film, even though it is a silent film, but it's more of an actuality, and I don't want to cover actualities on this show. So, yep, Trip to the Moon is the oldest movie I will ever cover on this, and you can't go much further back than 1902. And cut. Step right up, folks. Don't let the show end here. If you enjoyed tonight's picture, there's plenty more waiting just beyond the curtain. Follow the show on Instagram at Rambler Network. And for even more stories that spark curiosity, step right this way to RamblerNetwork.com, your one-stop destination for all things Rambler Network. So don't be a stranger and miss the next attraction, because the show is always just getting started.
The Rambler Network.